we've been talking a lot about the importance of community banks, specifically in this pandemic, and the idea of helping small businesses, whether it's getting those PPP loans out or really just providing a little bit of a support to the small businesses that keep our economy running. How do we, I guess, we get to a place where community banks have a little bit more presence than what they currently do in a world where we're just so used to the big banks, you know, the Chases and Citibanks and Bank of Americas?
Well, the community banks play a significant role. We just don't see them the way they are seen by the public. So you may be curious to know there's UMB in Kansas, which has 700 small correspondent banks that are active. One of the top banks in producing PPP loans was Frost Bank in Texas and Brookline in Massachusetts. One tiny member of AFX, a $2.5 billion New Jersey bank, actually was 15th rank in America in PPP loans, creating hundreds of thousands of jobs. So they're there, they're making a contribution, and 5 of the top 15 banks, for example, making loans are members of AFX, which is none of the big banks. So the big banks have a very important role, but the regionals, mid-sized communities, and minority-owned banks are playing a role.
Richard, it's interesting. I'd like you to expand on that because we've been speaking to a lot of minority-owned businesses, and they said because they didn't have a traditional banking relationship, they really were struggling in this pandemic to get a reprieve on a mortgage or to get a loan. How much further have you think community banks have really stepped up to the plate to fill that gap where perhaps minority banks didn't have a traditional banking relationship and therefore weren't quite getting the funding that they needed? Were community banks really able to step in and fill that gap?
I think so. We don't have the data, so it's hard to say, but the anecdotal evidence is that we speak to with our mid-sized regional and community banks, they have a very large proportion. The minority banks have an important role to play, and as you well know and point out, that the minority business owners have been disproportionately affected by COVID-19. 17% of the small businesses report problems, while 40% of the minority-owned businesses. We don't have enough capital in the minority depository institutions. It's hard to believe, but your viewers may not realize that there's only 21 African-American-owned banks in the entire country out of 5,000. But if you take a look at ours, like Citizens United does, and Atlanta, they process the loan as small as $400, okay? Unity in Texas, in Houston, United, processed loans of $1,000. These are loans that even mid-sized banks would never be processing. So the answer is give those folks more capital, get them a way to facilitate and develop partial ownership of loans originated by the big banks, and we will be on the road to getting more minority business owners' capital from minority-owned banks.
It's interesting that we've had United National Bank chief executive on saying that they had a close relationship with the likes of Citi, for example. Is this the way in which you say getting more capital to these sorts of banks? Is it by partnership, or is it by government intervention? Is it by the Federal Reserve? Can regulation help solve this issue of a capital lack?
That's a great question, a real softball for me. because the American Financial Exchange has made a major effort and now represents Hispanic, Chinese American, Korean American, African American, and our benchmark, Ameribor, has been approved by them for use in loans as a successor to LIBOR. We're building a coalition with our small banks and large banks to develop loan participation, to invent new equity-type instruments. And, of course, you've got the Treasury acting. You've got the Small Business Administration. You've got the Minority Business Development Agency. You've got philanthropies like Milken Institute. So I think this is a public-private partnership. We, for the last 3 years, have been pushing and engaging the minority-owned banks, and we think it's critical. And talking about the Fed, I'm sure your viewers are aware of the fact that Chairman Powell has talked about the need to support minority-owned businesses, and we think that is critical. It's very important for your viewers to recognize this is not a magic pill or a silver bullet. It's a public-private. It takes the banks themselves, because they know the minority-owned communities. Yeah. They live there. They active. So we've got to find a way to build them up, to pedestrianize them, because they have the reach into the communities that have been unfortunately most affected.